Hello, hello. Welcome to Science and Society Heat Advisory. I'm Jan Levin. I'm the founding director of Sciences here. It is such a pleasure for me to see a full house for our riff on Climate Week New York City, which we are calling Heat Week. This year, we partnered with Welcome, a global health charity based in the UK. Woo, shout outs for Welcome. They're here in the house with us tonight. Together, in partnership, we conceived of Heat Week, a thematic week in which we reflect on heat and health and climate. Please check out our Heat Week collection on our virtual magazine broadcast, where you'll find a collection of essays and poetry and some really beautiful design from our wonderful designers. First, some words of thanks. We have quite a spectacle for you tonight. Our thanks go out to Dalio Philanthropies, longtime supporters of Pioneer Works. Tonight, they've brought us stunning visualizations from Ocean X, which is the ocean science and exploration nonprofit from the Dalio Philanthropies. And some of their visuals we're showing earlier, taken with samples and footage from their Ocean X vessel. There's also going to be a projection on the bar in the garden, which is more of an interactive simulation. You can go and try to drive a submersible. Should be interesting. The Science and Society series is made possible by our very dear friends at the Simons Foundation and their Science, Society, and Culture division. They've been with us since the very early days, and it's really due to their generosity that these events are free and open to all. I cannot thank them enough. Our good friends. Woo for Simons, woo! And many thanks to the Sloan Foundation. With their generosity, we're able to bring all of these events beyond the walls to broadcast our magazine, both virtually and in print. They've actually helped us launch broadcast and made that possible. So a little woo, more woos for Sloan. And then I want to thank my mother. No, I'm just kidding. And finally, a heartfelt thank you to you, our audience. We could not and would not do this without you. If you are so inspired, if you are enjoying the programming, if you would buy our guests a fancy dinner in New York, a martini, a cheap coffee, please consider donating to Pioneer Works in the store or online. If you do not have the means, you are all welcome. Your generosity and your donation will be passed on, and that's how we keep these events free and accessible to all. We have a long night, a fun night. Please stick around after the conversation. We're going to have roving scientists. You will recognize them, such as my friend Gavin in the front row, by their classic white lab coats, which they assure me they do not wear ordinarily. They're going to extend the conversation into the evening. Feel welcome to talk to them about the conversation, about their areas of expertise. Also enjoy this incredible exhibition in which we find ourselves. This exhibition, if you did not read the vinyl, is called In Light of Innocence by artist Raul de Nieves. He's been in the Pioneer Works circle and family for a long time. We're really honored to have this kind of secular manifestation and that we're able to have these science events nested within an artist's vision. It's really a pleasure. Excuse me. For All Things Good is serving Mexican food, Mexican street food, which is available for purchase next to the bar in the garden. I have to do all the housekeeping tonight, you can see. And we're going to have in the bookstore, after the event, a book signing with the guests. In the bookstore, there are also limited edition hot body hats. You may have seen a couple of people wandering around with them, such as our roving scientist, Gavin. It features the equation that is the universal description of radiating hot bodies, if you're wondering what that equation was. And we also have a free, beautiful risograph designed by our in-house designers, Son Gong and Daniel Kent, which is really quite beautiful, and it's a selection from our Heat Week collection, which explains that radiating hot body equation. Tonight we have DJ Mahmoudou, who was enjoying the music tonight. Wasn't that great to come in and have some great music? He is behind the beats. There is more music to come after the talk in the North Hall by the bookstore, so enjoy yourselves in the garden, the bookstore. This Science and Society series has been going for some years. It was originally conceived sometimes in that garden, sometimes over said martini, where we were imagining talking about science themes that were very pressing and impactful for our everyday lives. And a lot of this did begin with our host tonight, Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. Many of you know, woo, shout out to Ayana. Many of you know Ayana is a marine biologist, a policymaker, and a writer. She is co-founder of the nonprofit think tank Urban Ocean Lab, and she is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures. A lot of that book, I believe, was inspired by the kinds of conversations that you're going to see tonight. And so this has really been an organic experiment with Ayana. And I don't want to make you wait, but before Ayana comes out, we have a few words from one of our co-conspirators from the Wellcome Trust, and then a surprise. First, from the Wellcome, we have the head of Impacts and Adaptation in the Climate and Health Solutions team. Please join me in welcoming Madeline Thompson. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It's not my normal venue. Normally I'd be in a science conference, etc., but this is by far more exciting. And it's made exciting not only because I'm here with a fabulous team from Wellcome and our partners, but also the audience and the commitment of the audience to engage on really important topics like climate and health. And at Wellcome, maybe some of you are not familiar, but we are fundamentally a research funder for health and well-being. We have a discovery program. We invest, we're the biggest investor in mental health solutions. We fund infectious disease, and we have a climate and health program that kind of cuts across all of them. So in the climate and health program, we have already invested in the last few years over £100 million in research specifically on the impact of extreme heat on health. And we focused it primarily on maternal and child health, on extreme heat and mental health, and also extreme heat and worker health. And one of the key things about focusing on health, you realize that actually, of course, extreme heat impacts everything across society. It impacts workers, therefore it impacts production, it impacts children, and therefore it impacts their schooling and education around the world. It impacts the economy globally. And to be perfectly honest, with this jacket on, I am already feeling the heat. Are you feeling the heat? So it's one of the things about investing in science, and I think this is a really important point, is that we know science is incredibly important in terms of enabling us to make good decisions. But science doesn't deliver on its own. And at Wellcome, we have cultural programming from a fantastic team, which is why I'm here tonight. And that programming is what is engaging partners here in the organization, and a lot of other activities that I'm kind of increasingly aware of that basically change the narrative, influence the way people think, and allow the science to actually do its work. So cultural partnerships are incredibly important to the delivery of science.
It's so good to be back here, y'all. Packing the house for nerdy shit tonight in Brooklyn. Way in an inconvenient and gorgeous location. So I am thrilled to welcome to the stage Jeff Goodell and Jainey Bavishi. Please join me. Jainey Bavishi is a nationally recognized expert in climate resilience. She most recently served as Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Deputy Administrator of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Shout out to governments who love science. That was a nice moment. Previously, she directed the New York City Mayor's Office of Resiliency, advancing strategies to address extreme heat and coastal flooding, among other things. All New Yorkers should be vigorously thanking her, yes. She has also held senior roles in the Obama administration, which is actually where we met when we both were working in the NOAA policy office. We also have with us tonight Jeff Goodell. His most recent book is the New York Times bestseller, The Heat Will Kill You First, Life and Death on a Scorched Planet. It was named a Best Book of the Year by not only NPR, not only The Economist, but also the Los Angeles Times. Goodell is the author of also 6 previous books and has covered climate change for more than 2 decades at Rolling Stone, which is how I became familiar with his work. So we're going to have an incredible conversation tonight. And it's such a treat to be having this here at Pioneer Works, which among the many things that they stand by is that science is part of culture. And as Jainey and Jeff and so many of us often think about, cultural change precedes policy change. So be the change you want to see in the world or something by like partying with us tonight, I guess. Tonight is all about heat. So the Earth, as our comedian reminded us, is hotter now than it has ever been in human history, and it's getting hotter. And we're here to talk about how these rising temperatures will impact our lives, how we might be able to adapt. This conversation, I should also mention, is being recorded for my podcast called What If We Get It Right? So laugh extra loud at our jokes, please. And while we'll talk a lot about adaptation and resilience to extreme heat, the getting it right part of things, I do think it's important to first have a firm understanding of the problem. So let's open this conversation by talking a little bit about the stakes. Jeff, you were tweeting about this event, or blue skying, or whatever it was that I saw. And you wrote, "Does this year's Climate Week feel more urgent than previous years?" And I'm curious what your answer to that question is.
Interesting. First of all, thank you, Ayana, for hosting this, and to everyone at Pioneer Works, and for all of you for coming. This is amazing to see you all here. It's so great to be out of the sort of climate ghetto and talking to people in this context. I was at a talk today with a U.S. senator, and there were like 40 people there. And so seeing all you here is so great. Well, what I meant by that is, we have an administration that is saying this is, climate change is a hoax. And one of the things that's terrifying and frightening in all kinds of ways, and damaging, and, all the things that you can say about that. But I think that, what I meant about the more urgency is, we all know this is something that's happening. This is real. Heat is in a certain way a truth teller, right? It doesn't, spin doesn't matter. We're putting more CO2 into the atmosphere. It's getting hotter. We all know it. We all see it. The events, climate impacts are happening all around us. This is not hypothetical anymore. And I think that, what I'm feeling from this week and this broader moment, we went through the sort of shock of the election and the shock of Trump's, dismissal of scientists, the dismissal of renewable power, the movement of the U.S. towards this sort of petro-state politics. And I think that there's starting to be pushback. And I think that we're feeling it here now. I think people are, this week, what I meant by that is people realize that we got to do something, that in the sense of react to this, push back against this. What are we going to do? And I think that just in the last few days, I've felt that urgency of this sort of mounting response to this, what I would call a kind of catastrophic administration when it comes to thinking about energy and climate change.
I'm glad to hear you say that you feel like people are sensing the urgency and thinking about how to step up, because as I was drinking coffee this weekend, I was looking at the Sunday New York Times magazine, and the cover of it was this image of a fragmenting planet Earth. And on the bottom of that front cover, in small letters, was this question: is the world giving up on climate change? And I was just angry that the question was even asked, because we don't get to give up on the future of life on this planet. Let's take that off the table and then think about all the many other options that are not giving up, that are available to us. And so Jainey, along those lines, just in that broad perspective, do you feel like people are giving up? What are you seeing?
Well, let me add my thanks, Ayana, to you, to Pioneer Works, to the Wellcome Foundation, to all of you for being here. Today, it's September 23rd, and it was 83 degrees in New York City.
11 degrees above the average temperature for this day.
It was hot.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be fall. This did not feel like fall. So I'm feeling that. This climate week feels like a paradox to me, right? We've been in rooms talking about innovations, we've been talking about solutions, and that is energizing. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we have a leader in this country, do we get to call him that? I don't know, on the world stage, talking about climate denial. Climate denial is being spouted on the world stage in just 8 months. A lot of progress that, I felt really proud about that we made in the Biden administration has been taken apart, dismantled. And that's really real, right? And so I think I hold kind of two truths. I think that there is the truth of the urgency of the problem and the real ingenuity of people at all levels of government, right? And federal government included, because there are still very good people working inside federal government, doing everything they can to work towards solutions. But also real delay and denial at the federal level, which I think is important to name because it explains, at least in part, why the solutions aren't keeping up with the science, right? And it also makes the ingenuity of the leaders that are pushing ahead anyway even more remarkable. So I think it's both things.
Yeah, thank you for that. No need to sugarcoat this. I'm thinking of this global statistic that by 2070, 1/5 of the planet could be as scorchingly hot as the rapidly expanding Sahara Desert. 1/5. And up to 3.5 billion people may have to move as their homes could become inhospitable. That is, what's the math there? 45 years? So I'm curious to bring this home a little bit, back to New York City, Jainey. Help us understand how heat affects a city, New York City in particular. Give us a reality check about how, to put it in the negative, and we're going to spend most of this time talking about solutions, don't worry. But Jainey, how screwed are we? How screwed is New York City when it comes to these projected climate impacts? What are some of our weak spots here?
I think the thing that I would highlight in cities especially is just the unequal impacts of heat, right? The low-income neighborhoods, heat maps follow redlining maps to a T. So redlining, racial inequity maps, you can look at those and you'll know exactly what the hottest neighborhoods are in any city, not just New York City. And so
I didn't know that was quite that stark.
There are studies on it, yeah. And so, neighborhoods with concrete and lack of AC are much hotter, unsurprisingly, than wealthier, leafier neighborhoods. And that's very real. And so low-income populations feel the brunt of the impacts of heat. It's the, I think, most unequal climate impact that we face as a species. And of course, it's important to also mention outdoor workers, construction workers, delivery workers, who also face those impacts unequally.
Jeff, I was going to get to this later, but I feel like we should talk about this now. Your recent op-ed in the New York Times on the new American inequality, the cooked versus the cooled. Tell us about this idea. Break it down for us.
Well, it's a little bit what Jainey was just talking about. one of the things that is difficult about talking about heat is that, there is this bifurcation, right? That we live, presumably most of you in this audience, we live in a privileged world where, we probably do most of our work inside. We do it probably in air-conditioned spaces. We are very fortunate to live in this sort of technological bubble. I live in Austin, Texas, and the belly of the beast. And I had this, first of all, I had this idea that I was going to write the book without air conditioning. I thought that would be like a really cool thing to do.
And your brain melted down.
Yeah, it lasted about like 4 days. And, then I had to flee into the air conditioning to get the book written. But, when you talk about like even the statistic about, the Sahara and how hot the planet's going to get, and people will say, are we going to migrate? Are we going to survive? The question is, who is we? Right? I mean,
absolutely.
Elon is right. We could live on Mars. I mean, I'm all in the fuck Mars category of things, but
it's the correct team.
Yeah.
Earth is the best planet.
Yeah.
Earth supremacists only.
If you had enough money and enough technological willpower and all that, you couldn't live on Mars, right? Who would want to and all that kind of thing. But it's the same kind of a thing here, right? People do fine in Austin when it's, 115, 120 degrees for a week or two at a time. We do fine in the sense that we live indoors, we stay indoors. I take walks at, before dawn. As soon as the sun comes up, it's like vampires. You like run back, away into your cooled chambers and things like that. So it's not a question of, for people like us, survival, but then you look out into the world, and to go talk about what the Times talked about in my op-ed piece in the Times was about the people who don't have that luxury, right? The roofer who's working on the house across the street, who's out there in 115, 120 degree weather, and he has to work, and if he doesn't work, he will not get paid. And we have, our governor has passed laws that prohibit water and shade breaks because it is a, loss of efficiency and productivity, right? So these workers are more and more at risk. And so, in the book, I talk about heat as a predatory force. And that's what I mean. It goes after the most vulnerable first. And there's lots of vulnerabilities, but one of the biggest vulnerabilities is the people who have access to cooling, whether it's air conditioning or cool spaces, and people who don't. And many of those are outdoor workers, are people who don't have the luxury of retreating into that air-conditioned bubble.
So I hadn't, until I read that op-ed, really thought about access to cool spaces as a new form of social stratification. Of course, it falls along the same lines of existing inequalities, but this is something that we certainly need to figure out how to address. And I'm curious, from both of you perhaps, what do you think the cooled people owe to the cooked?
Well, I would say that is the biggest question in climate in general, right? What do the people who are wealthy, who have privilege, who have access to cooling, access to it's the divide between the developed world and the developing world. It's what the loss and damage conversation is about in the climate talks. It's this fundamental injustice that is at the heart of the climate fight, is embodied kind of most purely with heat, right? That's the purest distillation of that injustice. And what do we owe is the hardest question, right? Because first of all, it's not simple. It's not like we can just say, oh, well, we owe them what? Compassion and cooling? Well, or money? I mean, there's no simple answer to that, right? But we certainly owe, at the very least, a recognition of this and a recognition of the different responsibility that we, the cooled and the lucky, have to the people who did, in most cases, and in virtually every case, nothing to cause the problem, right? No, the carbon emissions in the developing world are minuscule, small island states, Africa, where many places you want to name, they have contributed virtually nothing, and they're suffering most of the damages. And that's writ large in the climate fight, but it's also, microscopically true in Austin, and the poor guys who are even delivering the mail, right? I mean, there's a
Or the
giant
line
divide.
cooks in the Texas barbecue,
Totally.
as you mentioned.
Yeah.
In that piece. Jainey, to ask you a different version of that question, how is this something that you thought about when you were working in New York City government? I know there were some initiatives that you were part of for like, okay, well, this is the new reality. How are we going to care for each other in this city? And I guess like to add on to what has already happened, what would you imagine the next steps would be to really like complete that part of the work or take it over the line?
Yeah, we were prioritizing the most vulnerable neighborhoods, right? So we were, when I was working for the mayor's office, we launched a $100 million program called Cool Neighborhoods New York City, NYC, and it funded street trees, it funded cool reflective rooftops. It funded a social cohesion program called Be a Buddy, where we were looking after the most vulnerable residents in our most vulnerable neighborhoods. And with $100 million, it sounds like a lot of money, right? We prioritized 3 neighborhoods: Northern Manhattan, Central Brooklyn, South Bronx. Those are the hottest neighborhoods in the cities, and the most vulnerable neighborhoods in the city, that's what I should say. So we looked at both the physical impacts of heat risk, right? The actual temperatures, but we also looked at social indicators of heat risk: race, poverty, lack of AC. And
AC doesn't matter if you can't afford to pay the bills, and so you avoid turning it on.
Absolutely. So we were addressing these injustices by delivering resources to the communities that were most impacted, and that to us is what justice looked like. But I think there's another part of that story, right? Which is that's 3 neighborhoods out of 200, I think, in New York City, right? And not all New York City neighborhoods need the same interventions. However, there's a lot more work to do. And I think that cities, they are innovators. They can lead with urban design. They can lead with policy. They can lead with pilot programs, which are incredibly important. But to scale those to citywide solutions, you need the federal government. You need partners at the state and federal level. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, especially in this moment, right? We need to keep demanding federal action. We shouldn't wait for it, but we need to keep demanding it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that and your work to make all that happen. I think 2 statistics that may ground us in this reality perhaps a bit more concretely. I mean, gosh, concrete, that's sort of part of the problem, isn't it? Walked myself right into that. In urban areas, extreme heat exposure has tripled since 1983, with warming happening 29% faster in cities than in rural areas due to this dense concentration of dark pavement and buildings. And low-income neighborhoods in the US have on average 15% less tree cover, so 62 million fewer trees total, and are up to 7+ degrees Fahrenheit hotter than higher income neighborhoods. So if you think of the difference between 100 degrees and 107 degrees, that is unbearable. And then on the flip side, we know that things like installing green roofs could lower indoor air temperatures by up to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, which is huge, in addition to other benefits, potentially for biodiversity or stormwater runoff management. So the stakes are actually incredibly high. I'm going completely out of order because I'm trying to follow where your answers lead, and now... Give me 1 second. I think I'm done. I'm done with those 2. Okay. So New York City is doing a lot to try to get it right. And I'm curious what other places around the world, other cities, etc. Jeff, maybe you can chime in here. What can we learn from other places? Is there somewhere you would highlight, maybe somewhere in Europe that you've talked about before, just to lead the witness a bit here?
Yeah. But I think I want to say broadly, though, to put this in context, this big idea with how cities are designed and what's happening with our climate is that our world is built for a climate that doesn't exist anymore, right? So the implications of that are enormous, whether you're talking about heat or flooding or all kinds of aspects of climate change. And so we have this generational project before us, which is sort of redesigning cities in a different way, redesigning how we live in a different way, and that's a hard concept for a lot of people to get, and they're very wedded to the way we are now. This is the way it should be, and they can't imagine living in a different kind of way. I like drive around Austin, drive down Lamar Boulevard, strip mall after strip mall, and I can't wait for the reinvention to begin, right? But that's what we're talking about here, right? And so we are just in the first sentence of the opening chapter of this long story that we're going to be writing for the next, hundreds of years, really. So that was a long-winded thing, but to go specifically, I think that without any question, the city in Europe and probably in the world that is doing the most is Paris. Paris has done incredible things, partly because they have a very strong mayor who's been very outspoken in her leadership in this. The Olympics helped for money and kind of political momentum, but they did things like clean up the Seine, right, making it swimmable so that you have a kind of public cooling spot, right? That's something luckily we have in Austin. We have Barton Springs, which is this amazing public resource that, you can go to on a hot day and just get in the water. They did things like, street trees. They did things like, reducing car traffic, making many streets pedestrian only so they could plant more trees, more greenery. They did a major insulation project on a lot of low-income housing to reduce the need for AC. So they've done a whole suite of things literally in the last decade that has actually, transformed the experience of Paris. But part of the problem is, this warming is happening fast, and Paris is happening very fast, and they're not keeping up, right? It's the risks are still rising even with all of this proactive stuff. And so that's one of the problems.
The latest I read about Paris is that there's this butting heads between, I'm going to misstate the exact name of it, it's some sort of cultural commission, which is trying to protect the historic, iconic rooftops of Paris, which are these metal roofs, and people who are no, those are cooking us. If you live on a top floor apartment, which you'd think of as the best view, penthouse kind of thing, it is insanely hot in those places. And this cultural commission will not budge on the protocols for design because they don't want the look of the skyline to change.
Right.
And along the lines of what you were saying, this is a moment where we really have to think about redesigning, reinventing what it means to live in cities in particular, but in general, this is an architectural challenge, both building and landscape architecture as part of what we need to really be open-minded about.
Yeah, and it's also part of the struggle on all kinds of other levels of climate. That's certainly true in Paris with these tin roofs that, are so iconic, but, it's also a problem in Venice, right, with rising waters. I wrote a previous book about sea level rise, and I was talking to one of the leading architects in the city, and he said, well, flooding has been a problem in Venice from the very beginning of Venice, 1,000 years ago. And what we used to do is just build on top of the sinking buildings. And it's just this layer cake that we keep going up and up and up. But of course now, because the buildings are historical gems and they're so precious, we can't do that anymore. And so we have this fight between historical preservation of these buildings and adapting to this rising waters. So they've built this retractable kind of dam in the lagoon, which is a whole other story, other problems. But that's broadly a problem with South Beach in Miami. It's like, you have all these incredible Art Deco buildings that are right in the flood zone, and half the people say you cannot touch this. These are incredibly beautiful Art Deco buildings. And other people are saying, well, but it floods all the time and they're just going to go away. They're going to be destroyed if we don't move them. So we have to do something. And these are fights between this is not like a climate denial fight. This is like well-meaning, people on both sides who are trying to think about how to preserve cities and change cities to make them more habitable in this radically changing world that we live in.
These examples from Paris to Miami to New York are just making me think about how important it is who we elect as mayors across the country. Certainly in New York, if I were still voting here, I would be thinking about who's going to take care of me in the context of climate change, heat, etc. So maybe keep that in mind when you're voting this year. And I guess I would say, Jainey, in this mayor's office, when you were head of the Office of Recovery and Resiliency, resilience has become a bit of a buzzword in climate. I'm not sure it's always clear what it means. People are a bit loosey-goosey with that. So when it comes to heat in particular, what does resilience mean?
I think it means both retrofitting our built environment, right, our neighborhoods to make them cooler, retrofitting our buildings, retrofitting the design of our neighborhoods so that they're greener, they're more reflective, less surfaces that just absorb and trap the heat. But it's also taking care of each other. It is actually investing in social cohesion. It is looking after the most vulnerable residents. It's making sure that we're offering people access to cool spaces before they get sick inside their hot apartments where they cannot afford to turn on the AC. So I think it's all of those things.
Mm-hmm. In the spirit of getting it right here, maybe we could rattle off a list of ways we could adapt or become more resilient. So we could alternate between you guys, your favorite heat adaptation solutions. Who would like to start? You've already mentioned some of them, but let's just condense them all together.
Okay, I'll start. So, heat pumps. Okay, we've been talking a lot about AC.
We have a heat pump fan group in here, and I am thrilled you are here.
We need to have solutions that do more than one thing. So heat pumps are awesome because they cool, they warm, and they cut our emissions. So I think heat pumps are my favorite resilient solution.
How about the little fans that you hold to your face?
I don't know if we get any points for that one, Jeff.
Well, but I mean, obviously joking, but it's really weird in Austin how many people I see with them now. I mean, it's actually becoming a thing, of actually traveling with a little personal fan that keeps this side of your face cool and then that side of your face cool.
Desperate times. I'm sure that'll become a hat soon. Yeah.
And there's also the ice collar things people wear, right? And ice vests and personal cooling. I mean,
personal cooling devices.
I get probably 5 pitches a week in my email for people with various personal cooling device ideas. Cold socks, or all kinds of crazy stuff with some weird gel that they've developed with peanut butter and something else. I mean, I don't know, but.
Well, this was happening in Paris when the Olympics were there. They were having to change the rules of various sports to allow athletes more time to cool down. And they were putting on ice vests between their tennis sets and stuff so they wouldn't overheat. So there's definitely a burgeoning set of options there.
Well, I think it goes to the, people think about themselves. And I don't mean this necessarily in a bad way, sort of, but also not. I mean, it's I don't want to die, like the title of Jeff's book says. So what can I do, right? And they think, I can get an ice vest or a little fan or something like that. And I do think that personal cooling devices, for better or for worse, are going to be more and more of a thing. I mean, I literally see it in Austin happening, which is very strange.
Okay, Jainey, zoom us out a little bit.
My turn. Okay, keep libraries funded.
Ooh, I love that.
Libraries are cool spaces that everyone has access to.
Yeah.
But every time the budget gets cut for libraries, we are shutting down cooling centers, essentially. So keep libraries funded.
One of my favorite science and society events I've hosted here was called The Future of Public Knowledge. And I hosted the then CEO of Wikipedia and the chief librarian of the Brooklyn Public Library. And this was one of the things that we talked about, was all these other services that libraries provide to the public, including, like, apparently they have a sort of turn the other cheek policy for teenagers making out in the stacks. It's my favorite fact I learned that day. Okay, Jeff, back to you. Hard transition. What other solution for heat would you like to offer?
Well, I would like to offer the idea of renewable energy, like reducing CO2 emissions so that we stop heating things up. Like, that's a pretty important solution. And I would also, just to go off on a little bit of the lunatic fringe thing, one of the solutions that we are rambling toward at, all too fast for my taste, but is, this idea of geoengineering, of large-scale planet manipulation, where we put spray particles up in the stratosphere. Spraying a few particles up there helps reflect away sunlight. The sort of artificial volcano idea, we know that natural volcanoes have reduced, heat temperature of the Earth for a short period of time until they ran out of the sky. I'm not advocating this. I'm saying this is a nightmare solution, but I'm just saying that this is where we are going, because as it gets more hotter and hotter and hotter, there is going to be sort of, I think, a gathering momentum for what the hell can we do to cool things down. And this is one of the things that is, technically possible, politically a nightmare. But I think it's one of those things that we should talk about and get educated about, because it is going to be part of the conversation, and it's more than just like chemtrails. It's not, that's a whole other thing. This is a legitimate subject of scientific research and things. It's a political nightmare, but it is something that we should at least be aware of so that we can talk intelligently about it.
And I'll add that
Fan back there?
for those of you, solar radiation management from the back. If you do want to talk about this more, we have roving experts in white lab coats, including Dr. Gavin Schmidt from NASA, who can answer your questions about geoengineering. Okay, Jainey, Jeff mentioned 2, so now you have to mention 2 heat solutions to keep the score going.
Okay. Make sure weather forecasts remain a public good.
Ooh. Yes, please.
So I want to explain that one. I mean, it seems like people got it, but let me just explain what's at risk. So there's a clear threat to privatize the National Weather Service, right? And the simplest way of thinking about that is, what that means is that your weather forecast will be behind a paywall. But that doesn't really explain all the consequences, right? It means that some communities will receive weather information and some may not, right? There will be unequal coverage. And it also means that weather information could be subject to the same disinformation we see in the news every day. It is really scary. And we take it for granted in this country. There are plenty of places that don't get weather information reliably, but we do. And we need to make sure it stays that way. Already, heat is a silent killer, right? Jeff talks about it in his book. We don't see it in the same way that we see floods, that we see storms. And this, if we can't have access to information, we will be blinding communities even more than they already are. So,
yes. Protect the National Weather Service at all costs, or at the cost of, like, very few of your taxpayer dollars for a great service.
Okay, but I got to do another
You
one.
got to do another one.
Get to know your neighbors. It's really as simple as that. Socially connected communities are going to fare better in extreme heat. There have been studies on it. You can look up the Chicago heat wave. You'll read all about it. But it is so important, and it is just the simple act of getting to know your neighbors. If you have an elderly neighbor, if you have a chronically disabled neighbor, just check in on them when it's hot outside. Just make sure that they are doing okay, that they have what they need. We need to restore the social compact that, keep communities thriving, that keep communities safe.
Be a good neighbor, you guys. Jeff, you got any more?
Nothing of that. That was such a good one. The weather information is so important, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't know it's coming, right, you can't prepare for it.
Well, as the daughter of an architect and a farmer, I feel compelled to mention planting trees, which you talked about before, which can make several degrees of temperature difference in a neighborhood. And also building design. We can design buildings to be cooler. This is something that tropical communities have been doing for, centuries, and that we could be more thoughtful about our building design as well. Jainey, anything else? You're on fire. Keep it going.
I think I'm going to stop there.
Okay. Yeah. Feeling sort of complete. Yeah. So something you mentioned earlier, Jainey, that I wanted to come back to was this role of city governments relative to state and federal. So you've worked at these different levels of government. Federally, you've worked in both the Obama and Biden administrations on climate policy. And I'm curious what role you think the federal government should be playing to help us deal with heat.
Right now.
Well, right now, but also always. And you guys, I think this might be one of Jainey's first public speaking events since she's no longer a political appointee. So, give it to us straight.
So let me say this. I think that the federal government is still trying to play a role in extreme heat resilience. I think the focus has shifted to, heat resilient infrastructure, making sure our bridges are heat resilient. It's important. It's something that we also have to focus on, right? But the heartbreaking part of it is that the focus has shifted away from people. And the first thing we need to focus on, the most urgent part of the crisis, is making sure that we stay healthy and safe in the face of extreme heat. But I think the federal government's role is to be able to help us scale solutions. We need, first of all, the science. We need the policy mandates, the policy parameters to actually, create the kind of some of the groundwork to build solutions on, and then we actually need the funding. And I think, I try to find silver linings in what's happening right now, right? I think we've had, as a country, too much of a reliance on the federal government for the funding for adaptation solutions. And the federal government was never going to be able to be the only funder of and sort of meet the scale of the need. In the Biden administration, when people talked about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act as once in a generation funding, it always made me nervous because we know that we're going to need this scale of investment again in 5 years, right? That's the scale of the problem that we're facing right now. So I think that, some of the conversations that I've been a part of this week have been about how can the private sector help? What is philanthropy's role? And I think those are important conversations to have, right? Because we need to accelerate those solutions for attracting more capital and different kinds of capital to these challenges. But we still need the federal government to help us with that. So I think that's the role. Can we expect that right now? No, and I don't think we should be naive about it. But I also, like I said, we need to keep demanding federal action, and we need to keep innovating and experimenting at the local level, at the community level, at the state level, so that when the next opportunity for federal action, real federal action, opens up, we've got the playbook and we're ready to go.
Thank you. Something I learned in preparation for this conversation today was that FEMA doesn't consider extreme heat to be a disaster. Is that something that, should you have the power, you would want to change? Or do you think that's not the right place for that kind of thing?
I think it's the time to reimagine everything, right? Like, let's not just put ourselves in a FEMA box and be limited by that. Let's reimagine what the federal role in resilience looks like. Let's get rid of all the agency silos. They're being dismantled anyway. Let's rethink it.
Would you want to create a federal climate agency?
No, I don't think so. I think that we need climate to be embedded in the work of every agency, but I think we need it in a very real way. We've got to figure out how agencies can work together across disciplines, across silos seamlessly in order to meet the challenge the climate crisis presents. That is very hard to do, but we've got to figure out an enabling environment to do it.
Yeah. So thinking in this context of the politics of all this, so much of it, Jeff, as you opened with, is about the language that's being used right now to deny the scientific realities, the challenges that we're facing obviously makes it harder to run full tilt at solutions. So I wanted to spend a little time talking about the words that we use for this. As a writer, as a policymaker, you think a lot about how we describe things, how we put them down. And so, Jeff, the words we use have a big effect on how people are perceiving these issues of heat. And I'm curious what words you like and don't like and wish we would use when we talk about these particular challenges.
Well, first of all, you're right about language being a problem and a big, a worthwhile thing to think about, and especially with heat, right? Because whenever I get off the plane in Austin, there's a mural on the wall that says, welcome to Austin, hot music, hot food, hot you. And it's like, yeah, okay. But, it's one of those things that's like saying much more than it thinks it's saying. But talking about heat, one of the problems is that we use the word hot for all kinds of things, right? I mean, we use it to describe attractive people. We think of it as vacation time. I mean, there's a lot of problem embedded in even thinking about how we think about temperature, right? And it's a very difficult language problem to revise that. One of the things that drives me insane with the media, being part of the media, is, whenever there's a story about heat, there's kids playing in sprinklers or people on the beach or something like that, right?
The photo editing of climate stories is really problematic.
Right.
Ice cream cones.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I think this problem of language is really most emblematic in the discussion of heat. And how do you communicate the risk of heat? Because we think of heat as vacation, as good times, And when I was writing my book, there came a time when my editor said, as editors sometimes do, okay, what's the title of your book? And I was like, well, let me think about that. We had just some generic titles, and I came up with like a list of 20 titles, and I read through them all to them, and they were like, no. And then I said, The Heat Will Kill You First. And they were like, no. You are not calling your book The Heat Will Kill You First. No one will buy that book. That's a stupid idea. Forget it. But I really fought for it, and I finally won over my editor, who then took it to the marketing people, who said, no way, we're never publishing a book like that. And I kept fighting, and they basically ended up saying, you want to hang yourself? Fine, you can hang yourself. But I really wanted it.
And how good does it feel to have proved them all wrong?
No, right? I'm not sure how much of whatever success the book had was attributable to the title, but I do think it's memorable.
Well, you released it in the middle of like the hottest month of the hottest summer on record, when people were like, what the fuck is happening and what are we supposed to do?
I know, and I'm not telling anybody who my weather forecaster was. I had it planned. But the point I wanted to make about that is that I liked the title because it really made it intimate about you, right? It's about your risk, your life, that it can kill you. And that was the sort of genesis of the book for me, was walking down a street on a really hot day, realizing how dangerous heat was. I got dizzy and practically passed out. And so it really was an attempt to use language to communicate that threat. And it's a very hard thing to do with any climate stuff, because first of all, we're so used to hearing about it. And whether we call it climate change or global warming, people fight about that, climate crisis, climate catastrophe. I mean,
warming maybe sounds fine.
Right, but it's like all those words don't even begin to communicate the scale and scope and risk that we're talking about, right? And I get wound up in those conversations sometimes, but then it also, I think it doesn't really matter in that context, right? But I do think it matters a lot in how we use language to describe these things. And so that was what I struggled with in the book, right? And how there's also the idea that, how alarming do you want to be, right? How much, there's a lot of pushback against scaring people.
I experienced this. So my book is called What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures. People then assume it's like a hopeful, optimistic book. And it's, just reality-based book focused on solutions, not sugarcoating the problem, right? The book was actually sold with the title, What Do We Become, How Humans Survive Humanity, which was pretty intense.
Yeah.
And then it was Away from the Brink. And that was to sort of like, wait, we're close to the brink, but like, what does that mean? So I've been in all these conversations, and I may have tricked some people into reading like a very serious climate book with such a title. Jainey, in the policy world, are there terms that people are using that are helpful? Like, what's the language of climate in the policy context?
Yeah, this is interesting.
Or maybe like, what are people avoiding?
I am not a policymaker right now, so
You could just be like, that's a boring question. I don't have a good answer to it. Pass. Okay. Fair. I have other questions that are better than that. Okay, we're getting towards the end here. Normally I ask a question about, what if we get it right? What does that world look like? Paint us that picture. But I feel like in this battle of naming heat solutions, we've kind of described collectively what that world, that neighborly world would look like.
I have one more heat solution at some point.
Ooh, no, now is the time. What if we get it right on heat?
Vote. Vote.
Absolutely. Up and down the ballot, we need to be electing people who are going to do something on climate. And I guess I would add not just people who aren't climate deniers, but people who prioritize it, because there are so many other big issues that if people aren't really putting that up on the top of their list, these things get bumped down, especially if politicians are not understanding those connections between housing and climate, or energy bills and like the cost of living crisis and climate, and transit and workers' rights and working conditions and climate. So yes, +1, +10. plus 11 degrees above the usual average for September 23rd. What is the most boring, least sexy thing we need to do to get from where we are to achieving this vision of a heat-adapted world?
I'm all over that.
It's your time to shine.
Interagency coordination.
That's the correct response. Thank you.
No, you need like every agency working on these issues. You know, if you go to a candidate forum and they're not talking about climate, ask them what they're going to do about the climate impacts to whatever issue they're talking about. It doesn't matter what it is, there will be a climate impact. And that is the kind of thinking we need to bring to actually meet this moment.
Jeff, what is the most boring, least sexy thing we need to do to address this challenge of heat?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I guess boring in its familiarity and everything is, cutting emissions, shifting away from fossil fuels. That's not boring, but it is something we've all heard and we have all talked about and never seems to be happening as fast as it needs to happen. But I want to say one other thing about the language thing that I think the most important.
You're going to tell us what will kill us second after the heat?
No. But I want to say a word that I think is changing how we talk about climate now, even in the last year. And that word is money. I think that we are rapidly plunging into a time when the question of who is going to pay for stuff is going to be driving a lot of the conversation. Who is going to pay for Miami to redo their water supply? Because it's going to have to happen. Who is going to pay for the highways in California that are, washing out all of the time? Are the taxpayers going to pay? Are people in California going to pay? Are people in Florida going to pay? Who is going to pay when, houses on the Gulf Coast, on the west coast of Florida, are already plunging in value because people can't get insurance anymore? I just had to sell my mother's house in Northern California. She had had for 40 years or something. And one of the reasons we sold it was because fire insurance was so expensive that it became like crazy to keep it. And when I was selling my mom's furniture on Facebook Marketplace, she had a stroke and had to get rid of the house. And so virtually everyone who came to my mother's house to buy the furniture said, I need to move because I can't afford insurance anymore. And I think that the money is catching up with this story. It's no longer about doing good, thinking about future generations. Mm-hmm. It's going to be, oh shit, my fucking house and home insurance has gone up $5,000 this year. Or, it's going to cost $30 million to replumb Fort Lauderdale. And who are you, Mr. Politician, Mrs. Politician, going to stand up and tell the residents of Fort Lauderdale that your taxes are going to go up that much?
And energy bills is a big thing right now, especially with the Trump administration, curtailing the development of renewable energy that would bring more power online and help us keep those down at a time when people need more cooling, which is going to be unaffordable for so many. This has been an utterly delightful conversation. I have one more question and one request, which is do not leave after we get off the stage. You should stay. You should hang out. You should meet each other. These are all the people who also care about this. These should be your friends, your new community. So have a drink in the garden. DJ Mamadou is among other things, a climate writer, but he's doing me a very special favor tonight on the ones and twos in the atrium over there. We have roving scientists here to answer your science questions. If you are a member or on my guest list, you can go upstairs and see the exhibitions, which are about climate change. Maybe tonight's the night you become a member of Pioneer Works. And Otherwise, the show is incredible. I highly recommend coming back and spending some time with these different installations that they have on display now. The night is young. My friends from out of town who I was inviting for this, they're like, there's a reception at 9:30? It's just so late. So what should we, all of us listening to you right now, what's your call to action for us? You've mentioned some things like vote. What's the first step that we should be taking when we leave here tonight?
You know, I think we have a lot of talented people in the room, a lot of people in different perches, right? So I'm going to maybe disaggregate a little bit.
Great, bring it on.
So I think the first step is we all, as residents of the communities that we live in, as voters, we need to treat this crisis with the urgency that it deserves. I think, you know, if you work for any level of government, keep innovating, keep investing in adaptation solutions, keep pushing the boundaries. At the federal level, like, first of all, we need to support federal workers.
Yes. The civil servants in there who have been sticking this out deserve our respect.
Absolutely. So support federal workers. I think there's some federal workers in the audience today. Find the federal workers in the audience.
Drinks on me, just raise to find me afterwards. Yes, we'll make that happen.
You know, they are open to conversations. If you work for a foundation, if you work for a think tank, like, you know, approach them carefully. Maybe here, maybe find them somewhere else in an event like this. They want to partner with you because they are facing such incredible constraints on the inside. So depending on, you know, where you are, where you sit, if that's something that you can do, think about how to creatively do that. Don't just think of them as unreliable partners. And I think we've already mentioned some of the other things that all of us can do. You know, get to know your neighbors. Demand climate action. Vote, yes, but like demand every politician focus on this emergency. We can do this. You know, the heat. There are solutions before the heat kills us, and then, you know, we've got to find those solutions. We can do this. We just have to. We literally have to treat it like our lives depend on it, because they really do.
I think it's worth emphasizing that we have the solutions we need. We've been talking about these solutions all night. There's, of course, a lot of room for more innovation and creativity, and there's a lot of stuff we need to do, but it's not like a mystery what we're supposed to do. It's really a matter of how quickly and how justly we're going to do it.
And telling the stories of these solutions is the antidote to misinformation, right? So, like, we have to keep telling those stories. We have to keep showing that these solutions work.
Jeff, any marching orders?
Well, you pretty much covered it pretty well there. I think I want to give just a big shout out to science, to scientists.
Yes.
Who are under an incredible barrage of, you know, political nightmare and being defunded and discredited, and all of this that we know is happening, all of these strategies, all of this stuff depends on science. It all depends on, you know, people like Gavin, others here who are the people who are helping us understand all this. You know, the fact that I wrote a bestseller about climate change is, if anybody who was in high school with me would think, was hilarious. I mean, I was a bad student and I didn't take any science. I knew nothing about science. And it was only because, as a journalist, I became curious, and I would call people, scientists, up and say, what is this warming thing and how does the CO2 molecule work? And, I would ask really stupid questions to many, many, many scientists. And over time, I learned and I began to be able to tell these stories that I've been able to tell. And it's only because of the generosity and the sort of helpfulness of science. And I just think it's really important to understand that all of this, everything is based on, our advancement of scientific understanding of this. And I think that if there's one thing that I would, want to leave with, it's that. Because I think that to the degree that that gets undermined, contorted, hidden, buried, everything else then falls apart. And so I want you to go out and hug a scientist.
With permission. Or buy a scientist a drink tonight, maybe. This has been such an immense pleasure to host this evening. Thank you so much to the Wellcome Trust, to Pioneer Works, and most of all, to Jeff Goodell and Jainey Bavishi.